Like, in academia, in the U.S., it's so normal for all the professors stay in their office until 8, 9, sometimes even midnight. But I travel to Europe. It's impossible. If you do that, other people will look down at you. Why do you need to work so hard?
Sure.
So around 5 or 4, everybody just knock on other people's door saying, let's go home.
Yeah.
Precisely, U.S. is a latecomer in terms of industrialization. Maybe that explains why the U.S. behave differently. Yeah. Otherwise, but China compared to the U.S. is much even later comer. That's maybe one way to explain. But in the future, once China become rich, you will see Indian people work much harder, and the Chinese start to relax, and they want to get off around 4, and they only want to work for 3 or 5 days a week.
Yeah, I would say the Chinese work much smarter than the Indians do. So I'll give you an example. I was visiting Delhi. My family and I were going to go to Rajasthan in the north. We were on this beautiful 6-lane highway coming out of Delhi.
6-lane highway.
That's
very good.
Well, 3 each way.
Okay.
But it turned into a dirt road after about 50 miles.
Oh, okay. All right.
I said, well, what happened? Oh, the new mayor doesn't support Rajasthan and doesn't respect what they do. So he just stopped the road.
Okay.
So the amount of what I would call economic irrationality in India is huge.
It's huge.
So even though the people are very smart and they turn out more high-end students, which we saw at McKinsey than almost any other country, you do not have anything like the system in China where you've got large numbers of highly educated people advanced meritocratically in the party, and they're all on the same page. I mean, getting all Indians, just start with the Muslims and the Hindus, they are not a united country.
Right.
I think the U.S. for 150 years has been the top economy in the world. I think one reason you see very little intellectual curiosity in the U.S. about what other countries are doing is because they've been so used to the idea that we're number one. One reason they push back against China's success is because it's a dualistic mindset with winners and losers. Right. So Americans genuinely believe that if China is very successful, they win and we lose. And you'd explain that to Chinese people and they say, why do you look at it that? Why don't you just say, don't we want both sides to win? If you just think about in our government and listening to government people talk about China, they know nothing about China.
Really? They know nothing?
And I talked.
Seems the Biden administration and even the Trump administration, they have lots of people. Seems they know China very well, so well, so that they can design good policy to contain China.
Let's just say they're very confident. I would say grossly overconfident in what they know about China.
Okay.
I think if you ask them, tell me about Confucianism, they say, oh, we know all about that. The Confucian Institutes were put in the U.S. to spy. When you say, no, I'm talking about the Confucian values, you wouldn't find more than 5% of Americans who could explain anything about Confucianism. I was at Peking University and they said, Pete, we had a delegation of 16 Congress people, all very focused on China in a negative way. Of the 16, 1 had been to China 3 times, 1 had been to China once, 14 had never been to China.
Who are they?
I don't know.
Okay. Just about
but still, it's a very small number.
Right.
And when you listen to congressmen who generally are very aggressive about China and always explaining China and the way it works, so they'll frequently say, well, it's inevitable that China will become a democracy because the Chinese people are so unhappy. And you say, well, what evidence do you actually? They don't have any evidence because they've never been. And how do you explain?
But maybe on the other hand, it may be natural because I believe those congressmen, most of them have gone to Europe or even to Japan. But China just recently become developed. So therefore, they have not had the chance. Who want to go to a backward, underdeveloped country, right? The incentive was not there. You go to more developed or equal. When China just recently suddenly emerged, maybe they did not have the chance yet.
I mean, I just see it as a level of overconfidence based on 150 years of being number one.
150 years, okay, yes.
And yeah, I mean, it goes back to literally the late 1800s when the Industrial Revolution really gained steam. And the U.S. talks about the theft of intellectual property, like this is a unique thing. During the 19th century, the U.S. had a huge department in Washington whose only job was to steal intellectual property from the Brits.
Yes, yes.
So this has been going on for years.
Yeah. And actually the same, Brits, they, during their time, rise up, they spend lots of energy stealing technology from Italy.
Yeah.
And Italy stole technology from Arabs.
Yeah.
So this
has been going on forever.
Forever, that's right.
Yeah.
But later on, U.S. become an innovator. So and since then they start to think, we have always been an innovator and we're number one. That's true.
But I mean, China is innovative, but in a different way. China is much more application driven. So when the iPhone comes out, things like the iPhone and the internet and what I would call the big economic ideas, they tend to come from America. But if you look at the actual development of applications. So if you take the iPhone and look at all the businesses in China that have been built around the iPhone, it's pretty impressive and huge.
But it seems the same actually for the US, as you mentioned. In the 19th century, US was a student of Europe.
Yes.
And all the technology they learned, they copied, even they stole. But through that process, later on, you become on the top.
Yeah.
Maybe China was still in the stage of like early US.
Yeah.
Mostly rely on learning and mimicking.
Yep.
But later on, China will become an innovator on the top because you already start to see signs anywhere, right? Maybe that's a natural process for India someday maybe the same. India maybe nowadays or perhaps the next decades is still a very good student of learning, copying. But eventually they may become on the top, become a innovator in the frontier. I remember that in the 19th century U.S., if you search for encyclopedia, you search for a famous American scientist doing pure science, you find none, zero. But the 19th century, by the end of the 19th century, U.S. was already become top in terms of industrialization, in terms of commerce, in terms of application. But zero in pure scientific research. But once entered the 20th century, then U.S. become on the top. And in the early stage, U.S. will actually rely on immigrants from Europe because they have the two wars. Yeah. But later on, U.S. start to have its own very famous and very innovative scientists, more Americans. Then later on, you no longer see European names. Maybe that's just a natural process. So nowadays you still see China as very good at learning, mimicking, but you never know. I don't know. Maybe 20 years down the road, China may also start to have very innovative, not just the technology, but also in terms of basic research. Yeah. The government is now pumping money into universities, and universities are reforming their way of educating people. So this may be a natural pattern. Yeah. But it may not always be successful because many countries eventually could not move to the frontier.
Yeah. But in many ways, China's already there. I mean, if you look at Huawei was the global leader in technology and telecom with 5G. And that was pretty impressive. And if you look at what China has done in EVs, and what they did in high-speed rail. So there are a lot of areas where China has, I think, leapfrogged the rest of the world.
Do you think that the U.S. policy now is pushing or encouraging Chinese to become an innovator in chip industry?
Absolutely.
Otherwise, why would they have the incentive? It's much cheaper to buy U.S. chips. High quality, low price. You do on your own, it's very costly. And now you say, you do on your own, we won't sell to you. That may actually push China to there.
The reason you do want to become reasonably independent is you can't count on globalization. I personally think that the Contain China movement, history will look back on that as a very foolish idea. because what you're doing is you're really encouraging China to double down on its investment
Precisely.
in the areas where U.S. has a strength. And if you push the ultimate globalization or economic development, you're going to find that the Chinese, once they get truly independent of the U.S., they have long memories. They're not going to go back to the U.S. and say, well, okay, now let's be friends. They're going to say, you weren't there for us, and now we've matched you. We're going to go our own way, which would be a lose-lose.